Somewhere beneath the Southern Ocean, 1,000 meters below the last trace of sunlight, two of the largest animals that have ever lived are moving toward one another in absolute darkness. One of them is the largest predator on Earth that possesses teeth, a creature the length of a city bus, capable of holding its breath for over an hour and descending to depths that would crush a submarine. The other has the largest eyes ever measured in any animal, tentacles armed with rotating hooks, and a body so rarely seen that for nearly a century it was known only from fragments recovered inside the stomachs of the very animal now hunting it. Neither can see the other in any conventional sense. There is no light here to see by. The whale hunts using sound, flooding the water with the loudest noise produced by any living thing. The squid hangs motionless in the cold, watching for a disturbance in the faint blue glow of the water itself. For over 200 years, sailors, whalers, and naturalists have told stories about what happens when these two animals meet. They spoke of battles in the deep, of tentacles wrapped around jaws, of whales surfacing with the marks of enormous suckers ringing their heads. Those stories built one of the most enduring images in all of natural history. The truth, as science has slowly assembled it, from stomach contents, from scarred skin, from frozen specimens, and from a handful of extraordinary encounters in the last 20 years, is stranger than the legend, and in many ways quieter. This is the story of the colossal squid and the sperm whale. It is a story about cold, about pressure, and about darkness. It is a story about how two entirely different branches of life, separated by more than 500 million years of evolution, arrived at the same lightless place and became bound to one another. Join us as we descend, slowly, through every layer of the ocean, to the place where they meet. Chapter 1. The largest habitat on Earth. The ocean covers approximately 71% of the surface of our planet, holding around 97% of all the water on Earth. These figures, while familiar, understate the true scale of the environment, because the ocean is not a surface, but a volume. Life on land is confined to a thin band a few meters above and below the ground, whereas life in the ocean extends downward through an average depth of around 3,700 meters, and in places to nearly 11,000. When measured by habitable volume rather than surface area, the ocean constitutes more than 95% of the living space available on Earth. The overwhelming majority of that volume is dark, cold, and under enormous pressure. Sunlight, which sustains almost every ecosystem we are familiar with, penetrates only the uppermost fraction of the water column. Below a few hundred meters, the environment becomes one in which photosynthesis is impossible, and every organism must depend either on food drifting down from above or on chemical energy rising from below. This means that the largest habitat on the planet is also the one least like the world in which humans evolved. Despite its size, the deep ocean remains extraordinarily poorly explored. Estimates suggest that only a small percentage of the seafloor has been mapped at high resolution, and a far smaller fraction has ever been observed directly. Many of the animals that live there have been described from a single specimen, or from partial remains recovered by chance in fishing nets or from the stomachs of larger predators. Entire families of organisms are known primarily as fragments. This scarcity of observation shapes everything that follows in this story. The colossal squid, despite being one of the largest invertebrates ever to exist, has been seen alive in its natural environment only a handful of times. Almost everything known about its size, its diet, and its behavior has been reconstructed indirectly, from beaks in whale stomachs, from damaged specimens hauled up by long-line vessels, and from careful inference about the physics and chemistry of the water in which it lives. The deep ocean, then, is not merely the setting for this story. It is the reason the story took so long to tell. Understanding the environment is the necessary first step in understanding the animals within it, and so it is to the formation of that environment that we now turn. Chapter 3, The Layers of the Sea. The ocean is conventionally divided into a series of horizontal zones, each defined primarily by the availability of light and by the depth at which it occurs. These divisions are not sharp boundaries but gradual transitions, and the organisms that inhabit them frequently move between them. Nevertheless, the zones provide a useful framework for understanding how conditions change as one descends. The uppermost layer, extending from the surface to approximately 200 meters, is known as the epipelagic or sunlight zone. This is the region in which photosynthesis is possible, and consequently it contains the overwhelming majority of the ocean's plant life, in the form of microscopic phytoplankton. Nearly all of the food that sustains the entire ocean is produced here. Despite representing only a small fraction of the total volume of the sea, this zone supports the great majority of the biomass with which humans are familiar, including most commercially harvested fish species. Below 200 meters lies the mesopelagic zone, often called the twilight zone, extending down to roughly 1,000 meters. Here, sunlight is still technically present, but has diminished to the point where photosynthesis can no longer occur. The light is blue, faint, and directional, growing weaker with every meter of descent. This zone is home to an enormous population of small fish, crustaceans, and squid, many of which participate in the largest daily migration of biomass on the planet, rising toward the surface at night to feed and descending again before dawn to avoid predators. Beneath 1,000 meters is the bathypelagic zone, the midnight zone, extending to around 4,000 meters. No sunlight whatsoever reaches this depth. The only light present is that produced by living organisms. Temperatures hover near 4 degrees Celsius, pressure exceeds 100 times that at the surface, and food is scarce, arriving primarily as organic debris sinking from above. Below this lie the abyssopelagic zone, extending to approximately 6,000 meters, and finally the Hadal zone, comprising the deep oceanic trenches that descend beyond 6,000 meters to the deepest point yet measured, nearly 11,000 meters in the Mariana Trench. For the purposes of this story, the relevant region is the boundary between the twilight and midnight zones, roughly between 500 and 1,500 meters. It is here, in the last faint remnants of light, that the colossal squid appears to spend much of its life, and it is to this depth that the sperm whale descends to find it. Chapter 4. The nature of darkness. The disappearance of light with depth is not a simple matter of dimming. Water absorbs different wavelengths of light at different rates, and the selective absorption transforms the visual environment long before darkness becomes complete. Red light is absorbed first, vanishing within the first 10 to 15 meters, followed by orange and yellow. Green persists somewhat longer. Blue light, with its shorter wavelength, penetrates deepest, which is why the deep ocean appears blue, and why the last visible light at several hundred meters is a uniform colorless blue-gray. This has significant consequences for the animals that live there. An organism colored red, which would appear brilliantly conspicuous in surface waters, is effectively invisible below a few dozen meters because there is no red light available to reflect from its body. This explains why a remarkable number of deep-sea animals, including many shrimp, fish, and jellyfish, are colored deep red or black. In their own environment, these colors function as camouflage. By approximately 200 meters, the light has fallen to roughly 1% of its surface intensity. By 600 meters, it is reduced to a level that human eyes could not detect at all, though the eyes of many deep-sea animals remain capable of registering it. Below roughly 1,000 meters, sunlight is functionally absent, and the only illumination is biological. Another significant aspect of this environment is the direction from which the remaining light arrives. In the twilight zone, essentially all light comes from directly above. This creates a persistent and exploitable asymmetry. Any animal viewed from below appears as a dark silhouette against a marginally brighter background. An enormous amount of deep-sea evolution can be understood as a response to this single fact. Countershading, transparency, mirrored flanks, and the phenomenon of counter-illumination, in which an animal produces light on its underside to match the brightness of the water above and erase its own silhouette, are all solutions to the problem of being seen from below. The darkness of the deep ocean is therefore not a simple absence, but a structured environment with its own rules, its own opportunities, and its own forms of concealment. Understanding those rules is essential to understanding why the colossal squid evolved eyes larger than those of any other animal that has ever lived, and why, in an environment where there is almost nothing to see, seeing remained worth such an extraordinary investment. Chapter 5, Cold, Pressure, and the Physics of the Deep Beyond Darkness. The deep ocean imposes two further physical constraints on the organisms that inhabit it: extreme pressure and persistent cold. These conditions shape the anatomy, the chemistry, and the metabolism of deep-sea life in ways that are often invisible from the outside, but that govern almost everything these animals are capable of doing. Pressure in the ocean increases by approximately 1 atmosphere for every 10 meters of depth. At 1,000 meters, an organism experiences roughly 100 times the pressure present at the surface. At 4,000 meters, it experiences 400 times. These forces are sufficient to compress gases to a small fraction of their original volume, which is why air-filled spaces represent such a profound liability at depth, and why so many deep-sea animals possess no gas-filled cavities at all. For animals composed largely of water and solid tissue, high pressure is less immediately destructive than it might appear, because liquids are only slightly compressible. The difficulties arise instead at the molecular level. Pressure affects the folding of proteins, the fluidity of cell membranes, and the rates at which enzymes catalyze reactions. Deep-sea organisms have accordingly evolved specialized biochemistry, including modified membrane lipids and protective molecules that stabilize proteins under compression. Temperature presents a parallel challenge. Below the thermocline, the layer in which temperature drops rapidly with depth, the ocean is uniformly cold. Across most of the deep sea, temperatures range between approximately 0 and 4 degrees Celsius, regardless of latitude or season. In the Southern Ocean, where the colossal squid lives, even surface waters remain close to freezing for much of the year, and the distinction between surface and deep temperatures is comparatively small. Cold slows biological processes. Chemical reactions proceed more slowly, muscles contract more sluggishly, and metabolic rates fall. For many deep-sea animals, this is not a limitation to be overcome, but a strategy to be exploited. In an environment where food is scarce and unpredictable, a low metabolic rate is an asset rather than a liability, allowing an organism to survive long intervals between meals and to invest what energy it does acquire into growth rather than activity. This principle will prove central to understanding the colossal squid. Its enormous size, combined with the properties of the water in which it lives, points not toward a fast and aggressive predator, but towards something considerably slower, more patient, and more economical than the popular imagination has generally allowed. Chapter 6. The light that living things make in an environment defined by the absence of sunlight. The most common form of light is that produced by organisms themselves. Bioluminescence, the biological generation of light through chemical reaction, is extraordinarily widespread in the deep ocean. Research surveys have estimated that a majority of the animals living in the open water below 200 meters are capable of producing light, making bioluminescence arguably the most common form of communication on Earth. The chemistry underlying it is broadly consistent across a wide range of organisms. A light-emitting molecule, generically termed a luciferin, is oxidized in a reaction catalyzed by an enzyme, generically termed a luciferase, releasing energy in the form of visible light with very little accompanying heat. Remarkably, the same basic luciferin appears across many unrelated groups, suggesting either extremely ancient common origins or acquisition through diet, in which animals obtain the necessary compounds from the organisms they consume. The functions of bioluminescence in the deep sea are diverse. Some animals use light defensively, releasing luminous clouds to confuse predators, in much the same way that shallow water squid release ink. Others use it to startle an attacker or to illuminate a predator, and thereby attract the attention of something still larger. Counter-illumination, in which light produced on the underside of an animal erases its silhouette against the faintly lit water above, is widespread among mesopelagic fish and squid. Many species use light for communication, in courtship displays or in species recognition, and some use it as a lure to draw prey within reach. Another significant aspect of deep-sea bioluminescence is that a great deal of it is not produced deliberately at all. Vast populations of microscopic plankton emit light when mechanically disturbed, a phenomenon familiar to anyone who has seen a breaking wave glow at night. In the open ocean, this means that any large object moving through the water leaves behind it a faint, diffuse trail of light, produced not by the object, but by the countless organisms it disturbs in passing. This phenomenon is easy to overlook, and it is central to what follows. In a lightless environment, a large body in motion cannot move silently in the visual sense. It switches on the water around it. An animal capable of detecting that faint disturbance at sufficient range would possess an enormous advantage. And it is precisely this possibility that offers the most compelling explanation yet proposed for the extraordinary eyes of the colossal squid. Chapter 7. The Southern Ocean. The Southern Ocean, encircling Antarctica and extending northward to approximately 60 degrees south latitude, is among the most distinctive marine environments on the planet. It is defined less by the continents surrounding it, since it borders only one, than by a single enormous current. The Antarctic Circumpolar Current, which flows continuously eastward around the globe, unobstructed by any landmass. This current transports more water than any other on Earth and functions as a barrier, thermally isolating Antarctica and maintaining the extreme cold of its surrounding waters. Where the cold Antarctic water meets the warmer waters flowing south from the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans, a distinct boundary forms, known as the Antarctic Convergence or the Polar Front. Across this zone, which is often only tens of kilometers wide, surface temperatures may fall by several degrees. The convergence functions as a biological boundary as much as a physical one, and a considerable number of species are found exclusively on one side of it. Despite the cold, or rather because of the physical processes associated with it, the Southern Ocean is remarkably productive. Deep water rich in nutrients rises toward the surface around the Antarctic continent, fertilizing the sunlit layer and supporting immense blooms of phytoplankton during the summer months. These blooms in turn sustain vast populations of Antarctic krill, a small shrimp-like crustacean that occurs in swarms of extraordinary density and that forms the foundation of the entire regional food web. Upon this foundation rests an ecosystem of considerable complexity. Krill are consumed by fish, squid, seabirds, seals, penguins, and the great baleen whales, which migrate thousands of kilometers each year specifically to exploit the summer abundance. Larger predators, including the Antarctic toothfish, various seals, and several species of squid, occupy the levels above. It is in these waters, and particularly in the deeper layers beneath the productive surface, that the colossal squid lives. Its known distribution appears to be circumpolar, encompassing the waters around Antarctica and extending northward into the sub-Antarctic. Records exist from the Ross Sea, from the waters off South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands, and from the southern reaches of the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Ocean sectors. The Southern Ocean is therefore the stage upon which this story takes place, and its remoteness is one of the principal reasons the story has remained obscure. These are among the least accessible waters on Earth, distant from ports, hostile to shipping for much of the year, and expensive to study. Chapter 8. Food in a place without sunlight. Every ecosystem requires an energy source, and in the deep ocean, where photosynthesis is impossible, that energy must arrive from elsewhere. There are three principal pathways by which it does so, and together they determine the density, distribution, and behavior of nearly everything that lives below the sunlit layer. The first and most important is marine snow, the continuous downward drift of organic particles from the productive waters above. This material consists of dead plankton, fecal pellets, mucus, fragments of larger organisms, and the aggregated remains of countless small deaths occurring near the surface. It descends slowly, over days or weeks, and is progressively consumed and reprocessed on the way down. By the time it reaches the deep sea floor, only a small percentage of the original organic material remains, which is why deep sea communities are typically sparse. Marine snow is nevertheless the foundation upon which the great majority of deep sea life depends. The second pathway is vertical migration. Each evening, an enormous population of small fish, crustaceans, and squid, rises from the twilight zone toward the surface to feed under cover of darkness, descending again before dawn. This daily movement, detectable on ship sonar as a false seafloor that rises and falls, represents the largest migration of biomass on the planet. In effect, it transports surface productivity downward far more rapidly and efficiently than passive sinking, and it supports a substantial community of predators that never approach the surface themselves. The third pathway consists of large, rare, concentrated deliveries, of which the most significant is the whale fall. When a large whale dies and sinks, it delivers to the seafloor an amount of organic material equivalent to decades or centuries of marine snow arriving at that location. A single carcass supports a succession of communities over periods that may extend for many years, beginning with scavengers that strip the soft tissue and progressing to specialized organisms that colonize the exposed bones. Additionally, in certain locations, energy enters the deep sea from below rather than above. At hydrothermal vents and cold seeps, microorganisms derive energy from dissolved chemicals rather than sunlight, supporting dense and highly localized communities entirely independent of surface productivity. The essential consequence of all this is scarcity. Food in the deep ocean is thinly distributed, unpredictable in timing, and expensive to locate. Every aspect of deep-sea biology, including the low metabolic rates, the enormous mouths, the expandable stomachs, and the patient ambush strategies, reflects the fundamental problem of finding enough to eat in an environment where meals are rare. Chapter 9. The Ancient Lineage of the Cephalopods. The cephalopods, the group of mollusks that includes squid, octopuses, cuttlefish, and the nautilus, represent one of the oldest and most successful lineages of complex animals on Earth. Their origins extend back to the late Cambrian period, approximately 500 million years ago, when the earliest recognizable cephalopods appeared in the fossil record. These first forms bore little resemblance to modern squid. They were small, shelled animals, closely related to the other mollusks of their time, distinguished principally by a chambered shell that could be filled with gas to control buoyancy. That innovation proved transformative. The ability to regulate buoyancy allowed these early cephalopods to lift free of the seafloor and to occupy the open water column, an environment that at the time contained relatively few competitors. Over the following 100 million years, they diversified enormously, producing forms with straight, conical shells that reached lengths of several meters, and that were, for a considerable period, among the largest and most formidable predators in the sea. The subsequent history of the group is one of repeated expansion and catastrophe. The ammonites, characterized by coiled and often intricately ornamented shells, radiated into thousands of species and dominated the world's oceans through much of the Mesozoic era, alongside the belemnites, which more closely resembled modern squid in body form. Ammonite fossils are so abundant and so rapidly evolving that geologists use them to date rock layers with considerable precision. The mass extinction at the end of the Cretaceous period, approximately 66 million years ago, eliminated the ammonites entirely, along with the belemnites and the great marine reptiles. The lineages that survived were those that had already abandoned the external shell. Modern squid and octopuses descend from these survivors, having traded the protection of a rigid casing for speed, flexibility, and a dramatically increased capacity for behavioral complexity. That trade-off defines the modern cephalopods. Without armor, they became reliant on sophisticated sensory systems, rapid locomotion, elaborate camouflage, and, in many species, remarkable cognitive abilities. They evolved the most complex nervous systems of any invertebrate, along with eyes that rival those of vertebrates in resolving power, despite having evolved entirely independently. Today, the group comprises around 800 described species, occupying every ocean and every depth. Among them, in the coldest and most remote waters on the planet, is the largest invertebrate by mass yet known to science. Chapter 10. What defines a squid squid are distinguished from other cephalopods by a combination of anatomical features that together produce an animal built for movement through open water. The body is elongated and streamlined, tapering toward the rear, and is supported internally by a flexible structure known as the gladius or pen, a remnant of the ancestral shell reduced to a stiffening rod of chitin. This internal support provides rigidity without weight and without the buoyancy problems that an external shell would impose. The principal feature of the squid body is the mantle, the thick muscular cylinder that constitutes most of the visible bulk of the animal. The mantle houses the internal organs and functions as the engine of locomotion. Water is drawn into the mantle cavity, the cavity is then contracted by circular muscles, and the water is expelled forcefully through a narrow, directable funnel known as the siphon. The resulting jet propels the animal, and because the siphon can be aimed, the squid can move in essentially any direction, though it moves fastest traveling backwards with the mantle leading. Squid possess 10 appendages, distinguishing them from octopuses, which possess 8. 8 of these are arms of relatively uniform length, arranged around the mouth and lined with suckers. The remaining 2 are tentacles, which are considerably longer and which are typically thin along most of their length before expanding into a broadened terminal region known as the club. The clubs bear the principal armament, whether suckers, hooks, or a combination of both, and can be shot outward with great speed to seize prey at a distance before drawing it back within reach of the arms. At the center of the ring of arms lies the mouth, containing a sharp, powerful beak constructed of chitin and closely resembling that of a parrot in form. Behind the beak sits the radula, a toothed, ribbon-like structure used to shred food into pieces small enough to pass down the narrow esophagus, which in most cephalopods passes directly through the center of the brain. Squid possess 3 hearts, 2 servicing the gills and 1 circulating blood through the rest of the body, and their blood is blue rather than red, employing copper-based hemocyanin rather than iron-based hemoglobin to transport oxygen. This chemistry is comparatively inefficient at transporting oxygen in warm water, but performs considerably better in cold, oxygen-rich conditions, which is one of several reasons that the largest squid species are found in the coldest seas. Chapter 11 of Discovery, a creature known only from its predator. The colossal squid entered the scientific record in 1925, and it did so, fittingly, from inside the animal that hunts it. In that year, the British zoologist Guy Robson examined 2 tentacular crowns that had been recovered from the stomach of a sperm whale taken near the South Shetland Islands, in the waters off the Antarctic Peninsula. The fragments were unlike anything previously described. The arrangement of the hooks, in particular, distinguished them clearly from the giant squid, the only other cephalopod then known to approach comparable size. Robson named the animal Mysonicoteuthis hamiltoni. The generic name refers to the hooks positioned in the middle of the tentacular clubs, and the specific name honors the collector who had supplied the material. It was, in the strictest sense, a description of an animal that no scientist had ever seen. Nothing was known of its appearance in life, its behavior, its distribution, or its size. For the following several decades, the species remained known almost exclusively from such fragments. Beaks and hooks were recovered from the stomachs of sperm whales processed by Antarctic whaling operations, and occasionally from other predators, but complete or near-complete specimens were essentially unknown. This pattern of discovery is not unusual for deep-sea cephalopods. Sperm whales are, in effect, exceptionally efficient deep-sea sampling devices capable of reaching depths and encountering animals that human researchers cannot practically access. And a substantial fraction of what science knows about deep-sea squid has been recovered from whale stomachs. The reliance on this method introduced significant distortions. Beaks preserve well because they are constructed of tough chitin and resist digestion, but they reveal only limited information about the animal that bore them. Estimating body size from beak dimensions requires a reference sample of complete specimens, and for many years no such sample existed. Consequently, early estimates of colossal squid size were highly uncertain, and some considerably overstated the maximum dimensions the species is now thought to reach. Additionally, the fragments themselves carried an inherent bias, since they represented only those individuals that sperm whales had successfully caught and consumed. Whether these were typical of the population, or whether they were disproportionately the smaller, weaker, or more vulnerable members of the species, could not be determined. For most of the 20th century, then, The colossal squid existed in science as an outline, a set of hooks, a set of beaks, and a name. It would take until the closing years of that century and the early years of the next for anything more substantial to emerge. Chapter 12. The specimen in the freezer, the most important single event in the history of colossal squid research, occurred in February 2007 in the Ross Sea aboard a New Zealand longline fishing vessel named the San Aspiring. The crew were fishing for Antarctic toothfish, a large and commercially valuable species that inhabits the deep waters around the continent. As they hauled their line, they discovered that a colossal squid had attached itself to a hooked toothfish and was feeding on it, apparently unwilling to release its meal even as it was drawn toward the surface. The crew, recognizing the significance of what they had encountered, managed to bring the animal aboard and to freeze it intact. This decision proved crucial. Previous specimens had almost invariably been damaged, partially digested, or preserved in ways that compromised subsequent study. This individual, by contrast, arrived in the hands of scientists essentially whole. The specimen was transferred to the Museum of New Zealand Te Papa Tongarewa in Wellington, where it remained frozen for over a year, while researchers planned how best to examine it. The thawing, conducted in 2008, was a carefully managed operation, since uncontrolled defrosting would have caused the tissue to deteriorate rapidly. The process was conducted in a bath of salt water and was watched by scientists and members of the public around the world. The measurements taken during that examination transformed understanding of the species. The animal weighed approximately 495 kilograms, making it the heaviest cephalopod ever recorded. Its mantle length was measured at around 2.5 meters, with a total length, including the tentacles, of roughly 4.25 meters as preserved. Critically, the specimen was determined to be a mature female, indicating that these dimensions represented an adult rather than a partially grown individual. The examination also revealed a great deal about the animal's construction. The tissue was found to be soft and gelatinous rather than densely muscular, with a high concentration of ammonium compounds. The hooks on the tentacular clubs were confirmed to swivel freely on their bases, and the eyes, though collapsed and distorted by freezing, were measured at approximately 27 centimeters in diameter, immediately establishing them as the largest eyes ever documented in any animal. This single specimen, recovered by chance from the mouth of a fishing line, remains the foundation of nearly everything that is confidently known about colossal squid anatomy. Chapter 13. How large is the colossal squid? The question of maximum size is among the most persistently misreported aspects of colossal squid biology, and it is worth examining carefully because the popular figures and the scientific ones have diverged considerably. The colossal squid is, by mass, the largest invertebrate known to science. The heaviest confirmed specimen, the individual recovered in 2007, weighed approximately 495 kilograms. Estimates derived from the largest beaks recovered from sperm whale stomachs suggest that individuals somewhat larger than this exist, with maximum masses possibly approaching 600 kilograms and maximum total lengths in the region of 6 to 7 meters. These figures are substantially smaller than many earlier claims, which occasionally suggested lengths of 12 to 15 meters or more. Such estimates arose largely from the difficulty of extrapolating body dimensions from isolated hooks and beaks, and from the elasticity of squid tentacles, which can be stretched considerably in a dead specimen and which vary greatly in relaxed length. Contemporary estimates, grounded in the measured relationship between beak size and body size in confirmed specimens, are considerably more conservative. A useful comparison is with the giant squid, Architeuthis dux, which is frequently confused with the colossal squid and which competes with it for the title of largest cephalopod. The giant squid is longer, reaching total lengths of perhaps 12 to 13 meters, but the great majority of that length consists of two extremely long and comparatively thin tentacles. Its mantle rarely exceeds 2.25 meters, and its mass is typically well under 300 kilograms. The colossal squid, by contrast, is built on entirely different proportions. Its tentacles are relatively short. Its mantle is broader, deeper, and considerably more massive. The result is an animal that is shorter overall, but far heavier and bulkier, with a body plan that suggests robustness rather than reach. Another significant consideration is that our sample remains extremely small. Only a handful of adult specimens have ever been examined by scientists, and essentially all of them were recovered accidentally, either from fishing operations or from the stomachs of predators. It remains entirely possible that substantially larger individuals exist and have simply never been encountered, and several researchers consider this likely, given that the specimens available to science are those unlucky or unwary enough to have been caught.